Welcome to the 22nd episode of The Smartest People in the Room. If you've been following this series, you understand what we are doing, shining a light on incredibly smart, accomplished people and helping them share stories from their past, careers, lives, as well as anecdotes about their past, present, and future. Today, I am so pleased to welcome two of the music industry's most interesting, experienced executives and teachers, Larry Miller and Howie Singer. Before we get started, let me take care of a little bit of business. First, to the audience, please feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat window. The reason we do these webinars is twofold. First, we want to showcase really smart people and the amazing work that they do day to day in the industry. But the second reason is a bit more nuanced. Some of you may know that I am a music industry headhunter. By definition and function, I help people connect with companies. So in this series, my goal is to help you make such connections and invite you to take full advantage of the opportunity. Specifically, I invite you to engage with the speakers and the other attendees in the chat function of the Zoom. Please introduce yourselves, say hello to your friends, and make some new ones. And ask questions of our speakers. We will try to address as many of those as possible during the session. I want to thank all of our sponsors, First Horizon Bank, Bufkin Baker, Four Roses Bourbon, the Fairlane Hotel, Core Power Yoga, the Tennessee Entertainment Commission, Lightning 100, Tennessee Brew Works, Moo TV, Jive Printing, Project Music, and also Organics. So let's get to today's program started. When I launched this series, these two guys were high on my original wish list of target guests. They are the literal definition of the smartest people in the room and have the pedigree and track record to prove it. They have been nearly constant collaborators in digital music and higher education over the past 25 years. Howie Singer is an expert on the implications of technology for the music industry. As special consultant to Universal Music Group, MQA, and other startups, he advises on product and technology strategy related to high-resolution music, AI, voice interfaces, podcasts, and streaming data analysis. In 15 years at Warner Music Group, he served as SVP and Chief Strategic Technologist, analyzing services and companies that could enhance or threaten WMG's businesses. He is currently an adjunct professor teaching data analysis in the music industry in the NYU Music Business Program. Howie played a leading role in the transition to digital music delivery. In 1996, he co-founded A2B Music, a pioneering distribution service using AT&T technologies. Over his 20-year career at Bell Labs, he led teams developing retail and call center management software, speakerphones, cellular phones, and video phones. Howie received a PhD and master's degrees in operations research from Cornell and a BS degree in computer science from Stony Brook University. Welcome, Howie. And joining Howie today is Larry Miller. He is professor of music business at NYU Steinhardt Department of Music and Performing Arts Professions, where he is director of the music business program. He is a music and technology entrepreneur, advisor, producer, and host of the Musonomics podcast. He teaches undergraduate and graduate courses in music entrepreneurship, music analytics, strategy marketing, global music management, and the business structure of the music industry. He advises music creators and rights holders on public policy and litigation and provided expert testimony before the United States Copyright Review Board and the World Intellectual Property Organization, WIPO. Larry supports media and technology companies and their financial sponsors on capital formation and growth strategy, digital product and service development, acquisitions and restructuring. Previously, Larry was a partner at LEK Consulting and senior member of the firm's media and entertainment practice. He later served as executive vice president and general manager of MediaNet. Larry founded and operated Or Music, a Grammy award-winning independent record label and music publisher where he signed, recorded, and published multi-platinum artists Los Lonely Boys and Matisaju, and was vice president of market development at AT&T Labs Research, and began his career as a broadcaster at Tribune, NBC Radio Entertainment, and WHTZ Z100 New York. He's regarded as one of the most successful startup startups in U.S. radio history as the station went from worst to first within 72 days of signing on in the country's most competitive radio market. Larry has commented on CBS, ABC, CNBC, CNN, Fox News, NPR, The Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Business Week, Financial Times, The Economist, LA Times, Billboard, and Rolling Stone. He is the author of Same Heart, New Beat, How Record Labels Amplify Talent in the Modern Music Marketplace. His article, Metadata, How to Develop the Foundation of the Music Business of Tomorrow, was published in the Licensing Journal, and Paradigm Shift, Why Radio Must Adapt to the Rise of Digital, was published in Entertainment and Sports Lawyer, the ABA Forum on Entertainment and Sports Industries. He earned his MBA from Columbia Business School and BA at Brandeis University. Larry is also a Clio award-winning voice actor. As I said earlier, these are two of the smartest guys in any room they ever walk into, and it is my pleasure to introduce them as our guests on the Smartest People in the Room. Take it away, boys.
Thanks a lot, Tom. You need to stop. Oh, there we are. Great. Okay. So glad to see everybody here. Lots of old friends showing up in the names. We hope everybody is safe from the virus and the fires and locusts, whatever other plagues are descending on us these days, and looking forward to reminiscing a bit with Larry. We thought that it would be a good way to sort of talk about the business, since Larry's done so many different things, to sort of talk about that in terms of his history and sort of what we see as the prospects for the future. So maybe we start with radio, Larry.
Great place to start.
And
let me put it this way. It was a great place to start, 30 years ago.
True.
Oh, boy. Hey, everybody. I'm so glad to be doing this with you, Howie. There was a conference a couple of years ago where I interviewed Howie in a fireside chat. And I think it was, Howie's idea after speaking with Tom and Jim to kind of turn it around and do it this way. So I'm really delighted to do this. Although I'm a little exhausted after hearing my bio, Tom.
Right. But, you still got the voice, Larry. I know you started in radio at what, 14 with those pipes? Yeah. So as the story goes, it's a true story. I sounded kind of the way I sound now at 14. And so I could either be a total social outcast, or I could, find my way to the local rock radio station and play Led Zeppelin records and be, a pretty cool kid. And so that worked for me. And when I ran out of rock radio stations to get fired from in Boston, I moved to that big city, 3 hours and 180 miles away, and I'm still there today, sort of. I'm in eastern Long Island as we speak. Tell us your favorite Z100 story.
Oh, God. When I was at Z100, it was really just at the beginning of the beginning. Oh, wait, here. Because we are doing this here. Thanks, honey. Because we're...
Hi, Howie.
Hi, Howie. We're doing cocktail hour. It's happy hour, folks.
Right,
cheers, Larry.
We're doing this at 6 o'clock. It's cocktail hour. Cheers, Howie, and everyone. When I got to Z100, it was several weeks before the station went on the air. The drywall was still being hung. There was old gear being wheeled in off a truck that had been borrowed from WMMS in Cleveland, which was owned by the same company. And we were literally plugging stuff in and getting ready to go. But as anyone who was around New York or New York radio or paying attention to the radio business at that time knows, there was a superpower that Z100 had, and that was Scott Shannon. And Scott is still on the air today in New York at WCBS FM, and still shows every day in his morning show. I think what made that little baby radio station Z100 so successful, and that was the common touch. You know, people who criticize the radio industry over the last several decades, and I would include myself in that group, talk about the importance of being live and local. And of course, ever since the Telecom Act in 1996, we have seen a massive consolidation of radio ownership. We have seen a massive consolidation in playlists and playlist management, and just a horrific decline in the type and number of artists and songs that are played on music radio in the United States. But when I think back to the earliest days of Z100 in the beginning of August 1983, what we had was a leader who understood what it was to empathize and curate and just kind of show up and lead. And I learned lessons in that relatively brief time that I was at Z100 that I've carried forward with me and everything else that I've done.
So would you tell any of our NYU students to go get your resume ready for radio these days?
Well, what do you mean by radio?
Fair question.
When I ask students today if they listen to radio, they sort of look at me quizzically, and maybe not for the reason that you might think, because you might think, well, of course, these kids are just, many of them too cool for school, and I'm talking to you, NYU students in particular, who might be watching today, who really aren't terrestrial radio, FM radio listeners at all. But most of the quizzical look comes from, well, do you mean Apple Music One? Do you mean what Pandora does? Do you mean, Spotify's artist radio channels? Do you mean, any other kind of algorithmically programmed, lean back listening? As well as FM radio. And so that's always an opportunity to unpack that question. But if you're asking me, would I advise a young person today to go into the, broadcast radio business, strictly speaking? It's not that I would say no. I would say, what do you want to do? And by the way, those companies are facing just tremendous pressure this year, and have been now for a number of years. But this is just going to be a transformative and disintermediating year, Howie, to use a word that maybe we'll talk about later on this hour.
We will.
Okay, good. That is an almost existential threat, I think, to the broadcast radio model in the United States, where many of those operators have seen 50% or greater revenue declines during COVID. Of course, we don't subscribe to broadcast radio in the United States. The only revenue stream that they have is advertising. And so if they're operating on a relatively thin margin, especially considering that certainly all of the largest companies are the result of massive consolidation plays over the years of many, many, many radio stations, and that they took on a ton of debt to do that, they are saving every nickel that they possibly can out of the operation in order to pay debt service, which in my observation has led to a real tragic decline in the quality and variety of programming, and in particular music programming, that we hear in this country.
Yeah. Who would, if anybody had asked to predict what's the likelihood that drive time radio will collapse because nobody drives anywhere anymore.
Right.
If you'd asked somebody a year ago to put odds on that,
Yeah.
who would
Yeah.
have thunk it?
I guess it maybe collapse is too strong a word. I understand that, radio listening patterns have certainly been disrupted, and that morning drive time is an hour or two later in most markets than it was in, say, January or February. But the fact is, the retail advertising base that drives most radio advertising revenues has been severely diminished this year, and that's a problem.
Right. So if we look, though, probably the company that looks like it has the full stack of things, and it sort of shifts gear to the next phase and talk about, the birth of digital music, would probably be Sirius XM, because they have Pandora. They've bought assets that give them a full range, and you can say they're not even only a satellite radio company anymore, because they're getting so much revenue from those other businesses.
Right. Not to mention that, that the parent company that owns Sirius XM is likely to end up controlling iHeart, the world's largest commercial radio broadcaster, and by the way, owns a third of Live Nation too.
Right. That's sweet. Talk about the smartest guys in the room, Tom.
Yeah. They're not. Yeah, I only feel like the 23rd smartest guy in that room.
Which brings me to sort of the next phase that we'll talk about. And, it's funny to be in something that calls the smartest guy in the room. As somebody who started his career at Bell Labs, I was never the smartest guy in the room because, I'd be in a meeting with somebody that won a Nobel Prize. So literally won a Nobel Prize for the Big Bang Theory. So, I appreciate the compliment, but I'm a little more modest than that, having worked at Bell Labs. And, in some ways, if I hadn't met you at Bell Labs, I don't know that we'd be having this conversation here today. So talk about how you ended up there and how we got started in this crazy game 25 years ago.
Right. So after business school, I had gone into the consulting dodge and ended up in a consulting business that was starting off at scale that AT&T started in, I guess, the mid 90s. And I remember, Howie, that I think that the day that we met was like my first week in that company. There was a meeting that had been convened of everybody who was working on cool stuff for the media business, right? Which was mostly at that time the broadcasting and cable business, not so much about music, a little bit. But you showed up at that meeting with some really cool stuff to show. And I thought I better pay attention to that guy. I'm still paying attention to that guy.
Right. We had that in some ways was the birth of A to B Music, which eventually became an internal startup in these early days, competing with Liquid Audio and meeting some of the other folks who are on this list, like Jim Griffin at Geffen Records, who was the first one to download a song very slowly over broadband connections. But we quickly teamed up because AT&T had assets in audio compression and in security, because the labels wouldn't do anything without having their music be secured. Of course, at the same time, MP3s were starting to show up in services that Jim Griffin just said it took 22 minutes to download his song on Common.
Yeah, I always say that, you want to understand what it was like to download a song then? It was like sipping a McDonald's shake through a cocktail straw.
Yeah, it was 1995, 96 when we got started. And we did have cool stuff. We had a music player that played flash memory. And the other thing that we did, which is one of the things I talk about in my class now, is we built a streaming jukebox. And at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, AT&T was a corporate sponsor, and they were redoing the hall with new panels of signatures of the inductees. And we got the labels to send us every CD of every inductee, and we ripped all those songs using AAC, which is the compression algorithm AT&T had, used by iTunes now, still. And we built a database of 30,000 songs, when we're talking about 60 million today in a streaming service, but There was a server in the basement with 30,000 songs, every song from every inductee, and you went up to a touch panel. Could you imagine? You touch it to control it, with pictures of the albums and names of the songs, and the music immediately played. And, you know, the record executives who saw it said, when can I have that? And we said, when will you license us? But, you know, we knew where things were heading. We were just a little too early.
Yeah. Yeah. That conversation, when will you have it? When will you license us? Here's a handful more songs. I think that went on for a few years.
Yeah. Yeah. They restricted the rules that people could have them, and they kept the prices high, because really until Napster collapsed the business, it was a sideline. You know, CDs were just too profitable to muck around with. Right. And the fact that you and I were telling them the business was going to shift to sending music over, you know, we were saying phone lines then, now broadband connections. Mm-hmm. You know, they were willing to experiment, but they really weren't willing to go all in until things crashed.
Yeah. Yeah. Isn't that the way, though? Things change slowly, and then they change very fast.
Right. So you mentioned we come back to disintermediation. You want to tell the disintermediation story?
Yeah. So you and I flew around the planet for a few years there in the mid to late 90s at the, you know, music companies in, you know, the United States and in Europe and in Asia too. And I remember one particular meeting that I think has been written about in a couple of other books. Others have written, you know, histories of the early days of the digital music space. And that story, I think, has been told a couple of times in print. The story was, I don't know if you've actually revealed the company that it was at, but I'll say that it was at Polygram in London. Yep. And, you know, we can perhaps, you know, still protect the guilty today by not naming names. But Howie, why don't you set the stage?
Yeah, you and I were at the end of the table. There were 15 people in the conference room. We explained what A to B music was. I think at that time we were still referring it as atoms to bits, because we were taking physical things and turning them to digital, at which point the executive said to us, don't refer to my music as bits. We knew we weren't going to go well at that meeting. And we explained, though, that the opportunity to go direct to consumers this way, that they could, as a music company, make the connection between artists and fans directly and disintermediate all the people in between. Mm-hmm. And the head of the company at the time turned to the guy next to him and said, these guys talk a fucking different language. Forgive my French, but that's the quote.
I think he said, I don't understand a fucking word they're saying. I think it was something like that. Yeah. At the time, Howie's team in the labs, then called AT&T Labs Research, had built this portable device that played music. So the device itself was a little bit bigger than, you know, your phone, but it would play music that was stored on a PCM CIA card. So think the size of like a credit card that slid in to this, you know, portable device, and we would play it. And it sounded, you know, pretty good. I mean, we were just using AAC at the time, and, you know, we would shake the device and say, see, you can even move the thing around and it doesn't like wobble or lose its place like that portable CD player does that you may be using. And that was then.
Right. And we you know, competing with others at AT&T, and then the plan was to spin that company out. And I think we both learned some painful lessons about big companies not being willing to let go.
Yeah, we did. We did. You know, I thought then that I would write a book someday about intrapreneurship, how hard it is inside a big company, especially a really big company, to do really innovative things. I never wrote that book, but I think that who was the guy who was around then who went to Singapore? He worked for Singtel. Do you remember? He was in the early digital music space. I don't know, maybe Jim Griffin or somebody out there remembers who I'm talking about. But I think he actually wrote that book, which I obviously did not read. about the challenge of doing like super innovative, like really disruptive things from inside the bowels of a really big company that's operating at scale and, has a business model to protect.
Yeah. So if we skip ahead, just like we kind of did with radio and brought it to today, now you've got all these huge companies, and I do mean huge, whether we're talking about Tencent or Google or Apple or even Spotify in its valuation. Would you advise our students now they should go work for a startup in a music space? Is there room for that? Where is this heading now? Or
well, sure, sure, there's room for innovation. They can also, and they do, go to work for those companies as well as the major music companies and music publishers and the live companies and all of the DSPs, and some of them go off and work in artist management companies or start artist management companies or something else. Some of them go to law school, which is not such a terrible idea, especially today.
What I see happening is that some of these companies, and I've had this conversation with some, I focus a lot on data because data analysis in the music business is what I teach in the program that you run at NYU. And what seems to happen is that good companies, and you could say this takes them off the table, they don't have an IPO, they end up getting purchased, right? As an acqui-hire frequently to get the employees,
Yep.
Spotify bought Echo Nest and Apple bought an AI company to help with their recommendations. And then it seems to create new space for new things to spring up, because once they get brought in the house at some bigger company, they can't service everybody, right? So, the labels don't use Next Big Sound anymore because it's owned by Pandora,
right.
Sirius XM. And so what seems to happen is I think that's the space. Unfortunately, you could argue that the big companies buying things up doesn't necessarily foster as much innovation as in the past, but that seems to be the trend we're on, because the big guys can buy just about anybody.
It's true. Even, at the very earliest stages, any startup pitch will include a discussion in the first or second meeting about exit strategy. And it's just not sufficient to say that we're going to build a company that sustains itself over the long term and that we're built forever and that we're going to have an IPO and become, Google. There aren't that many companies that can really do that. And so one of the things that you need to consider when you are building something is, can you ever get profitable and sustainable? And on the way to doing that, who is a potential buyer for this business? Maybe not so much as an acqui-hire, because the investors would like to get a better return on capital than they typically do when there is an acqui-hire, which is usually just a return on capital with a small premium. But very often that is what we see.
So we've talked about the startup side of things. Why don't we talk about the label side? Tell us a good Or Music story, and then we'll shift to some of your more recent work about where the labels stand today and where they're heading in the future.
Yeah, okay. Or Music. Okay, so we spin out the A to B music team from AT&T Labs. That gets absorbed into Reciprocal at the time, a company that had raised just a god-awful amount of money from SoftBank, and I think we had over 100 institutional investors over 4 or 5 rounds of financing. By the time Microsoft ended up putting us out of our misery, but that happened. And I went, back to consulting. Actually, during the .com implosion of, I guess it was 2000 into 2001. We used to say that the new B2B and B2C meant back to banking and back to consulting for people that had been operating, innovative, disruptive, potentially disruptive startups during Internet One. But anyway, I went back to consulting, and that was at LEK. And when I was at LEK, it was that was a pretty amazing time. We did a ton of work in and out of the acquisition of EMI, really, by Terra Firma, and just a ton of other music transactions that happened at that time that really laid the foundation for the way the music industry is currently structured, or at least owned. And that was an incredible education for me, and absolutely informed the way I think about new business opportunities, in particular M&A opportunities, even today. But after a couple of years of that, and really no longer being 25 years old at that point in my life, I thought, I'd been in radio. I had done the music tech thing at scale and been in strategy consulting in good firms. And I thought, well, maybe then would be a good time to figure out if I was actually any good at finding artists and writers and, developing them and making records and putting them out and seeing if anybody else thought that they were any good. The other thing to note about that time, is that it was right after 9/11. And that was a pretty dark time in New York. And I just thought it was a good time to start a company that invested in artists and writers. And so I did, with a partner, and we had distribution through Sony. And the way it worked in the beginning is I think the way that it often works. The first couple of records that we put out were creatively important to us. We thought that they were wonderful records. They sold almost zero, and one of them actually sold negative numbers. What I learned was that when you're doing a sales forecast for things that don't exist yet, especially for new and developing artists, to put in, back in those days, the equivalent of, I don't know, maybe 20,000 albums will sell, or times 150,000, whatever the equivalent today is in the stream-based economy. The number isn't even zero. The number can be a negative number if most of the records that you put out there get shipped back. So the first couple of records were not entirely successful, but the third one kind of treaded water. It was a Tower of Power record, which did exactly what we thought it would do. Thank goodness. And, Tower of Power by then was a legacy funk band that had a huge following around the world. And we inherited that project from Epic, where they had previously been, and where my partner had previously been. And the fourth record, though, really changed things. The fourth record was a band called Los Lonely Boys. They were three Texican brothers from San Angelo, Texas. And when it was shopped to us, literally in the week that we opened the company, I listened to it and I just thought that there was something magical and super special about that, that tight vocal harmony that only, brothers can have. Think way back to the Everly Brothers, for example. Or the many other, brother acts that have come and gone over the years. And we thought there was something special there. And I said to my partner, we should get on a plane and go see these guys. I think this is important. And he looked at me and he said, "Oh, come on. This is so cheesy. This is, this is so not ready for prime time." And I said, "Let's just go. We don't have anything else to do." We had just literally opened the company. So I don't know if Kevin Womack is on, but the band was then managed by Kevin Womack in Austin, Texas, as is still the case today, these many years later. And they happened to be playing at I think it was it the Steamboat in Austin, Texas, the next night? So we went and we saw them. And although there were only like 9 people in the room, including us, the band's wives and girlfriends, Kevin and the bartender, they just tore the roof off the place. It was ridiculous. It was one of the most amazing live things I had ever seen. And so, we signed them, and we also signed them to a publishing deal. And we went, and, that record came out, and it was, a record of the year. It was a multi-platinum, Grammy winning sensation. And we put out a few other records, including this record by Modest Yahoo, Live at Stubbs, which was another one of those weird situations where, if anybody out there is familiar with Modest Yahoo, not an obvious, pop music sensation, but, we could see that there was something happening around this guy. And, unlike what a label would normally do when you sign, someone new, is, take them off the road and make a proper studio record. There was so much excitement happening around his live show, and he had this tour planned through, really the best clubs in the United States, and he had a great agent. And so, we looked at the tour routing, and we thought, where can we record a live record in a place that we already, understand and know people at. And sure enough, he was playing at Stubbs, in Austin. And so we ended up making Live at Stubbs. And although Sony, really Epic, made, overtures toward us during Los Lonely Boys, by the time Modest Yahoo happened, it was an offer that we couldn't and didn't refuse. And so after that, the label went to Sony. We retained the publishing for another year and sold that to what was still then EMI Music Publishing the next year.
So again, let's wind the clock forward. If you were doing it today, you'd go look at, where Modest Yahoo's fans are listening on Spotify to figure out where to go do that. And you've spent a lot of time talking to the labels, wrote the big report last year, which got a lot of attention in terms of where are the labels today? Is there a future for the labels? And I know you're working on an update for that now. So why don't we talk a little bit about where the labels stand today? Do they have a future? That's the question I was asked, 25 years ago. It still gets asked. So yeah. I'll ask you now.
Yeah, I'm going to say in a word, yes. And here is what I actually believe. Forever, for most of the last century, at least, labels fundamentally do 4 things. They discover great, talented artists, occasionally geniuses. They put those geniuses with collaborators, creative collaborators, to make the music be as good as it can be. They take the music and, video today and lots of other stuff that artists create, and connect that artistic output with the possibility of good commercial outcomes or great commercial outcomes. And then when those good or great commercial outcomes happen, share those economics with the artist. Those 4 things have always been the case. Those 4 things are still the case today. But the how of how all 4 of those things happen has been permanently changed, transformed by the evolution and disruption brought by the digital music business, in particular streaming. And Howie, one thing that I want to talk about is data about music, because data and really the rising tide of data about music discovery and consumption is kind of fundamental to what you and I, do every day today. And I remember a time soon after I started teaching at NYU, and you were still at Warner, and we had lunch at that restaurant at 30 Rock. I forget the name of it, the one by the skating rink over there. And I said, geez, Howie, somebody at school asked me, what do we not already do? What do we not already offer students that we should? In other words, is there a course or kind of a pathway into the business or an approach that we are just missing? What do you think that is? And you were the first person who said to me, you crank out these really, great kids who are super smart and passionate about music and music discovery and music consumption, and turning people on to music and music production and, marketing and promoting music. But the thing that no school is doing yet is training them in kind of the analytics and and just the skill sets around being able to hit the ground running with respect to all of the tools and frameworks and apps that we have today to understand how to pull insights out of all of that chaos, the ocean of data generated every day around music consumption. Go do a course about that. And so
little did I know that I made my job for myself.
Yeah, you did. You did. And so I talked to a number of other people about this too. Alex White, especially, speaking of Next Big Sound, was one of them. Alex was very helpful, as you were, in putting the initial version of that course together, which I taught for the first couple of times. And I think that in hindsight now, I mean, we sort of felt it in our bones then, but in hindsight now, having been doing a version of this course now for the last 7 or 8 years or so, that course in music analytics, data analysis for the music industry on both the graduate level and the undergraduate level, provides students with just an unassailable competitive advantage in competing for the best jobs and internships that there are. And it almost doesn't matter where in the industry the student or recent graduate is thinking about applying that course, whether it's doing A&R at a record company or working in music publishing or working in the live business or going to work for one of the DSPs. It doesn't matter. Just showing up on day one with those skills to be able to use those tools and frameworks in order to pull, insight out of chaos just provides, a young person with just an advantage that's not fair for anybody that, that doesn't have that background, whether they are coming from another music business program or, let's face it, you don't need, any college degree to go to work in the music business, let alone a music business degree, but it helps. And what we have found now, having been observing this at close range over the last 8 years or so, is that a course in music analytics is just an unfair advantage.
Yeah, what I found, it's one of the few positives about teaching the class via Zoom is it's a lot easier to line up guest speakers.
Right.
Part of the class is getting experts in different parts of the industry. And what's good is, pick any phase of the industry, whether it's a management company or it's Live Nation or it's Spotify itself or it's YouTube. Every one of them has, data people in the company, whether it's dealing with how do they calculate the royalty payments and understanding, why there isn't a fixed price per stream that gets paid for every time a, click happens in Spotify, because that's just not the way that the model works under the agreements that currently exist, rightly or wrongly. That's just not the way it works. So we have somebody from Spotify explain how they calculate the numbers. You can have a debate about fairness or equity or are artists getting enough, and it's a good debate to have, but it's important to understand exactly how the things get calculated if you're an artist or a manager to an artist. So, getting those folks to come to the class is actually easier, and you can find somebody everywhere. I actually think it's more broad, though. It doesn't matter what business we're in, whether it's, fast fashion or hospitality or whatever, everything we do creates this data exhaust that unfortunately some very big companies mine to their benefit, not always understanding ourselves how much of our privacy we're giving up, but it is the world that we live in. And having the ability, as you say, to sort of glean those insights. You know, I had an artist come to my class last semester and she said, I focus on my super fans. And she explained how she found those super fans and how she communicates with them, and she makes them an offer and makes them part of her. It's not really, it's not called a fan club, but to her it is. And she focuses everything there because she figures if she can please those 1,000 people that are on her list that are the most passionate ones, the stragglers, the more casual fans will come along, right? And she focuses on where are they? And that's the city I'm gonna go to. And if that means I have to go to, you know, Brazil on my next Latin American tour, that's where I'm going to go, because I have a base of super fans who, when I tell them I'm coming, they're going to help get the word out. And, you know, she's mining her own data to build a career outside the major label system in this place to, you know, do better.
Fair enough. What else are we going to talk about?
Oh, I see you answered the microphone question.
Yeah, it's a Sennheiser 416, but you know, I got to say it's plugged into a lot of other stuff.
But it's not, I could have that microphone and all that gear. I wouldn't sound as good as you, Larry.
Oh, I don't know about that.
So if you're, what, is anything changing for this next round of the report for the labels and the update? Has anything?
Oh yeah, right. Yeah. So right. So we put out this report, a year and a half ago, about that was the Same Heart New Beat report, which you can download. It's a free download at musonomics.com, and that was the result of. It was really the first large-scale, mostly qualitative look at the transformation of the industry. And it was very useful as a public policy tool to explain to people on the Hill, you know, what it is that labels actually do. But I think, you know, for people in labels to be able to explain to others, you know, what they do, as well as, you know, our students and, you know, other, you know, policy organizations, or, you know, around the world who have been using it. But one of the things that got the most traction in the press when it came out was the growth in new artist signings that had happened over the previous 3 years. So it wasn't just qualitative. There was a fair amount of quantitative stuff in the report, and we had access to a lot of proprietary, you know, financial and signing data. And so there had been just enormous growth in artist signings over the previous 3 years. And that was, you know, a statistic that, you know, the journalists and public policy people really latched onto coming out of the report. It was like, oh, geez, you know, streaming. So there's all of this music now being uploaded to the streaming services, and labels are signing more. And so more new artists are being signed, and so on. So we wanted to be able to update the data around not just new artist signings, but to put some nuance around the explosion of growth in the kinds of services that, you know, labels and even, you know, unbundled label services companies provide today to artists who need those services, whether in bundled or unbundled form. And so we're going to write about that in the new version of the report that will be out early next year.
Okay, so we have questions. We've done such a good job plugging the data class. People are asking whether it can be audited or whether we're going to offer an online version. So we'll come back to you as the head of the program on that.
Yeah. The answer is not at this time. The data class is not unbundled, speaking of unbundling. And, you know, you need to come to NYU and enroll in our undergrad or graduate music business program. Although, you know, a couple of years ago, I didn't even talk about what a huge competitive advantage that class is. And now there are a number of other classes like it around the country. And maybe it would be a good thing to do like an online version of that class.
Could be. We'll have to think about it. I'll talk to Alex, who teaches along with me.
Yeah, okay.
So the other question we have is about daily, weekly reading. How do we keep on top of things? And, you know, I'm fairly eclectic. I have alerts set up in Google for just about all the companies I want to follow, you know, ranging from Tencent to Apple Music. And I'll give a plug to Mr. Griffin. And I've been on the file list for years. And, you know, that's a hive mind that has lots of people keeping tabs on the news. Many of them are on this session as well. So I take advantage of them finding stories that are out there. You can, I guess Jim can add to the chat how to send them a note if you want to get signed up for that list, because it is a private list. But whether it's penny fractions or stratechery or, you know, I'm a techie, so I list, lots of those things that are more general. But of course, you know, the big four companies, whether it's Facebook or Google, are pretty active in the music space. So, you know, fortunately, I read fast.
Yeah, I would say, you know, read broadly and deeply, read all of the music business stuff that there is, but don't become a boring person and just read music business stuff. Read other stuff. Read other stuff about music, but also read other stuff about not music. Makes you a more interesting person.
Yeah, well, and I've been following a lot about, I think it's so interesting how different the film space has evolved from the music space, right? We have a music industry where exclusives on streaming were a thing until Sir Lucian Grange at Universal said, we're not doing that anymore. And everybody sort of stopped. And so everybody's catalog was the same. You can't say they've differentiated greatly on features yet, although in my opinion, they should. Whereas on the movie and TV side, you know, when you hear about a show, if you don't, you know, I haven't seen the morning show from Apple, which is their most nominated program. I don't subscribe, and I don't know that I want to pay for a 5th subscription service.
I know. Is that show good?
I don't know. I haven't seen it.
I don't know. Let's ask people on the chat. I don't know. Is that show good? I don't know.
But I did get a free Hulu subscription with my Spotify, so that helped me there.
Right.
So
yeah, there's a lot of shows.
There's too much to watch. That's for sure. So
just to go back and talk about radio for a second, I am intrigued about Apple kind of doubling down in the linear radio thing with, what are they? I guess it's called Apple Music One, Apple Music Hits, and Apple Music Country, I think, are the three primary rebranded names of their genre channels now, which I guess you have to listen to through Apple Music. But besides the points that I was making before when we were talking about sort of Z100 and the state of the radio industry, a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but not so much, that there is one thing that's super important that radio is still good at when it's done right. And I think they are doing it right at Apple Music One, and that is to give context to the music. Also, repetition, sort of works when you're trying to break something. But the notion that music radio, whether, digital music radio or, terrestrial FM music radio, can, when it's done right and really, really well and in an engaging way, provide context around the music so that you know what you're listening to. It just makes more sense, notwithstanding the commercials and some of the other annoying stuff that's in there, than just a handful of songs that have been somewhere on the spectrum between algorithmically and humanly programmed. And I just think that, radio in general gets short shrift when it comes to context. And I've been as critical of the radio industry as anyone over the last couple of decades. But, context, as it turns out, matters.
Okay. We're being asked lightning round of prediction. Who wins the streaming war?
Oh, good. I don't know. Spotify.
I think Spotify does.
Spotify or whoever buys it.
Ooh, okay. Any predictions on that front?
Nope.
Okay. TikTok and Oracle. Does it survive or?
Yeah, TikTok survives.
Okay. I still don't see Oracle making sense other than Trump will approve it. That's the only reason it's going to happen.
That is so annoying. But yes, I think that, whatever, noise happens around, the current executive branch and TikTok, that, TikTok will be with us for a while.
Okay. The other lightning round question is being asked, what's your superpower? I'll say that for me, in terms of looking back on my career, it's my ability to understand this engineering stuff at some depth and explain it in English to people who don't have any background in the technical stuff. I wouldn't have survived this long if I didn't have that. For you, Larry, besides that voice, what's your superpower?
That was always the case. I think explaining in plain English complex things about the ins and outs of music and its interaction with technology, but in particular, just, music business practices as they happen, since, let's face it, no one would invent a business that is structured the way this one is out of whole cloth if you were doing that today.
That is probably true. I think we're ready to wrap, Mr. Truitt.
Gentlemen, I honestly could speak on behalf of the audience and sit here for at least another hour listening to you guys. It's fascinating. And I want to thank you for sharing your time and your wisdom. You're two of the nicest guys in the whole music industry, in addition to being two of the smartest. Absolutely. So thank you. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks, Tom. And thanks, everybody.
Yeah.
Again, we're the ones who won today for sure. Folks, we do these every Tuesday and Thursday. I'm continuing to experiment with the time. In fact, the next program we're doing is Thursday, and we're doing that one at 5 p.m. Eastern, so 1 hour earlier than we are tonight. We're bringing back some old friends from Nashville, F. Reed Shippen and Mark Montgomery. These guys will throw a lot of F-bombs at you. They'll be talking about music, technology, cannabis, who knows what else. It will be very well worth your time. Finally, just let me say, be nice to everyone, wear a mask, and vote on November 3rd. And I'll see you soon.